Hey guys, I'm literally gonna immediately hop right into the video because I have a lot to say. My name is Gina Polnev. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. If you have not yet done so, make sure to like and subscribe. Comment down below what your thoughts are on this video. I just wanted to say, I've already mentioned this in many videos. A lot of people already know I'm Russian. I never really celebrated Thanksgiving. If I were to ever celebrate Thanksgiving, it's usually me going to one of my friends' houses. And so I never really knew the history of Thanksgiving or how it started. And in school, like many of you, I was taught that the Pilgrims and the Native Americans, or as they would call them in school, Indians, which obviously they're not Indians. Thanksgiving was celebrated in honor of being grateful and thankful and because of the peace treaty, and that's basically what we know about Thanksgiving. And in fact, that is unfortunately not the reality. This is the video about the reality of Thanksgiving, so we're gonna hop right into it. I took literally so many notes. In the early 1600s, New England, aka United States, was known to multiple indigenous groups. I'm gonna butcher the name of their language. They spoke Algonquian and their population was roughly 100,000 people. They were considered to be the first people of light, and they also called their land the Land of Dawn. The Pilgrims were originally called separatists, which we will get into a little later, but before the Pilgrims even came to New England, the indigenous people have been trading with Europeans for over 100 years. But unfortunately, their relationship worsened when the Europeans would kidnap them and sell them for slavery and would basically traffic them. At this time, it was difficult for the Europeans to steal the land of the indigenous because the population was already so high, so they weren't able to steal the land. But in 1616, tradesmen came to the indigenous land and ended up giving them disease, which eliminated nearly over half the population of the Native Americans. So it became very difficult for them to fight off their land, and because they never were introduced to this disease, they didn't have any immunity, which is why they were dying off in such rapid speeds. Around this time in England, King James began to persecute the Puritans as well as the separatists, which I mentioned earlier were the Pilgrims, and so they decided to flee to Holland where they can practice their religious freedom. Unfortunately though, when they were in Holland, they realized that they want to maintain their national origin, so they decided to flee to the New World. They chose America, and in 1617, they asked King James for rights to build a colony on the new land, America, and in order to pay off their debt, they decided that they will catch fish and bring it back to Britain. The Mayflower set sail September 6th in 1620 from England and landed in Cape Cod 2 months later. They landed and the Mayflower Compact was signed in 1620. Unfortunately, the settlers had no idea how to fish, which is pretty unfortunate because they literally told King James that they would come to fish in order to pay off their debt, but they didn't know how to fish, so they began to steal from the indigenous people. They began to steal from their graves and their homes in order to find a means of survival. Unfortunately, however, 44 give or take settlers ended up dying while landing on the new land because of a lack of resources and also because of poor weather. The settlers, however, were greeted by a Native American named Somerset, who's also most known as Squanto. To the settlers' surprise, he actually spoke English fluently and told them that they can build their land on a certain area where the indigenous people that were originally lived there were wiped out due to the pandemic. Squanto actually knew English because he ended up being one of the Native Americans who was kidnapped and he sold for slavery, but then when he came to England, he somehow arrived to a home of a man who decided to teach him English. When he came back to New England, he realized that a majority of the population was wiped out, and yeah. I'm gonna butcher this one more time, so please forgive me, but the land was originally owned by the Patahet Nation, and like I said earlier, they were wiped out due to the disease that the tradesmen brought to them. The settlers were very excited to trade with the Native Americans because obviously the Native Americans and the indigenous people had a lot of things that they could trade, like fur, clothing, food, etc. And And because of the previous encounters that the Native Americans had with Europeans, they didn't trust the Pilgrims at first, but then they decided to sign a peace treaty which reassured peacefulness amongst both the communities. And so the Native Americans after this began to taught the Pilgrims how to grow their own food, how to catch their own food, and basically how to survive. They ended up having such a successful harvest in October 1621. Because of the successful harvest, the Pilgrims decided to have a huge feast where they feasted for 3 days straight, and this is where the Native Americans joined them as well. They brought deer and other food and they feasted all together for 3 days, and this is what we technically know as the first Thanksgiving. But the story doesn't end here. Unfortunately, after the first Thanksgiving, things take an incredibly sour turn. As we know Thanksgiving, it is a day for appreciation and thankfulness, but back then, Thanksgiving to the Puritans was actually a day to thank God. It was also a day to fast. I mentioned Squanto earlier, who happened to be the only person from the indigenous group to speak English. He ended up having a much higher advantage over anyone else in the community because he spoke both the indigenous language as well as English. Squanto realized his advantage, so he decided that he wants to overturn the main leader of the indigenous group. So he goes up to them and tells them, hey, I basically have the settlers under my finger. If I want them to be peaceful, they'll be peaceful, and if I want them to have war, they'll have war. A few of the indigenous members did not trust Squanto and felt a weird vibe, so they went ahead and told the leaders of the settlers about Squanto's baby. Anyways, about what Squanto wanted to do. Then the Native Americans ended up finding out what Squanto wanted to do, so they wanted his head and they wanted him dead. The settlers obviously didn't want this. They didn't want Squanto to be killed because he was very useful in the fact that he spoke both English and the indigenous language. But in the peace treaty that they both signed, Squanto happened to be owned by the indigenous people and punishments were only held by the indigenous people. The settlers ended up agreeing, but then another ship happened to come across while this was all happening. The Native Americans became restless and left. These new settlers decided to create a colony in Boston, but unfortunately, instead of creating peacefulness amongst the community that was already there, those settlers began to abuse and manipulate the indigenous people that were in Boston. The Native Americans finally had enough of the mistreatment by the settlers, so they decided to abolish the peace treatment that was happening, but unfortunately, by this point, it was too late because more and more settlers kept coming to New England, and this ended up causing there to be an overpopulation of settlers compared to indigenous people, and they ended up taking over, telling the indigenous people that either they convert to Christianity or they were to be exterminated. And so what happened ended up being a mass genocide of Native Americans for their land that the settlers stole and took. The peace treaty ended up lasting from 1621 to 1660. The first Thanksgiving represented harmony between the two nations, but unfortunately that peace came to an end when the settlers decided to abuse their power and basically exterminate hundreds and thousands of people for their own selfishness and greed, even though the indigenous people literally taught them how to catch their own food and how to grow their own food and gave them so many things. All the settlers wanted to do was just take and take and take, and that's basically how Thanksgiving was started. It started with the genocide of many people, and to this day we're literally still living on stolen land, which is really unfortunate and really sad. That's why I think that Thanksgiving needs to be canceled. The current idea of Thanksgiving that many Americans celebrate, being thankful and being appreciative, that's awesome. We should have a holiday for that, but I think it should be a different day, and I don't think it should be celebrated in the way that we celebrate Thanksgiving. Many indigenous people don't celebrate Thanksgiving. Obviously, they use this day to mourn their brothers and sisters and everyone that they've lost due to the Pilgrims. There's nothing wrong with being grateful, obviously, but just don't forget your history and how it started. I always found it really mind-boggling when in schools, Americans would literally dress up younger children as Pilgrims and Native Americans and throw on a little show for parents. I don't know if you guys ever did this, but I literally did this in elementary school, and we threw a little show for Thanksgiving where half of us would dress up as Pilgrims and half of us would dress up as Native Americans, and it would be this little show we threw on as how the Pilgrims and Native Americans became good friends and how everything was all okay and how Thanksgiving is a means of harmony, we are literally taught lies. Of course, as we know, the history is always told by the lion, not the sheep, and it's really unfortunate. We are literally teaching our children appropriation and teaching them that it's okay to take things and steal things and abuse your power, and it's not. People think that cultural appropriation is okay when it comes to wearing headpieces or Halloween costumes as Native Americans, and it's simply not okay, and we need to reverse our history and start telling the truth and start telling our children the truth instead of telling them this false fairy tale that never actually happened. I never knew how Thanksgiving was started. I literally assumed the story that I was told throughout my whole entire school career, that the Pilgrims and Native Americans became best friends and then had their harvest and the end. I didn't realize that Thanksgiving was started on a mass genocide, and I'm assuming that many people don't know this because Americans still celebrate Thanksgiving and it's a huge American tradition, and Thanksgiving kept happening after the first Thanksgiving due to political agenda. I think we should rewrite our history, and I think we should celebrate a different day for Thanksgiving. And Thanksgiving to me really is being thankful and appreciative for everything you have. I think it's really important to show gratitude and to give back to everyone who has given to you. And I think that value is incredibly important and incredibly crucial for humans. Comment down below what you are thankful for. Comment down below if you guys knew the true history about Native Americans and the settlers and how Thanksgiving started. I'm incredibly thankful for you, baby. I love you so much, but you want to go, so I'm gonna let you go. I'm thankful for my family, my friends, for my camera, for my YouTube channel, for my education. I'm thankful for literally everything that I have in my life, and I have nothing but thankfulness and gratitude to give. Still celebrate Thanksgiving, but just know your history, know how Thanksgiving started, and educate yourself. And basically, I just want to end this video by saying thank you for everyone who watched this video. I am incredibly thankful for you guys. I am thankful for my subscribers and everyone who likes and comments my videos. It means the world to me. And just be thankful. Thanksgiving shouldn't be the only time of the year that you're thankful. You should be thankful every single day for everything you have, because there's always going to be someone else who has it a lot worse than you do. Every morning, I like to write down 3 things that I'm thankful for the day before, and then at night I like to write down 3 things that I was thankful for the day that has happened. And I recommend you do this as well, because it really helps you become more appreciative and happier in general. And I love you guys so much. I hope you have an amazing Thanksgiving. It's happening in 2 days. Just say thank you to everyone, be appreciative, and I love you guys so much. I hope you have an amazing day. Bye. I'll see you next Tuesday.